Welcome to this compliance playbook. If you're working at a facility that handles chemical byproducts, manufacturing materials, or really any potentially dangerous waste, you know the environmental rulebook can feel like a totally foreign language. Today, we're taking those dense federal guidelines for hazardous waste and translating them into plain, actionable English. Think of this as your quick start guide to staying legal and keeping things running smoothly. So let me ask you a quick question. Do you actually know how your facility's waste is tracked once it leaves the loading dock? Does it need a digital passport? Environmental compliance really boils down to precise definitions, strict administrative pathways, and totally honest reporting. If you don't know exactly where your materials end up, well, you might already be at risk. But hey, don't sweat it. We're going to break this intimidating code down into 6 bite-sized pieces. The baseline rules, key vocabulary, digital tracking, requesting exceptions, legitimate recycling, and finally, the real-world stakes if things go wrong. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the hazardous waste baseline, setting those ground rules. Federal regulators have built a super specific framework to make sure dangerous materials are handled safely from the exact second they're created all the way to their final disposal. This overarching baseline sets up the vocabulary and the required procedures that every single compliant company in the country has to follow. It's literally the ultimate cradle-to-grave playbook for waste management. Moving to Section 2, mastering key environmental definitions, or, in other words, speaking the regulator's language. The very first term you absolutely gotta know is generator. Now, we're not talking about a machine here. A generator is a place. It's any facility or site where the daily operations actually produce hazardous waste or cause a material to become regulated in the first place. If your manufacturing process creates the waste, congrats, you're the generator. You are the starting line of the whole compliance journey. Next up is the manifest. Think of this as your ultimate chain of custody document. It's the official shipping record, which is increasingly digital these days, that travels right alongside the waste. It guarantees that a barrel of toxic solvent doesn't just, mysteriously vanish during transit. It proves exactly where it came from and where it's going. And where exactly is it going? Well, to a designated facility. You definitely can't just send hazardous waste to the local town dump. It has to go to a highly specific, legally permitted location that is officially authorized to receive, treat, store, or dispose of your exact type of waste. As the generator, you are legally required to designate this authorized facility on all your paperwork. Okay, Section 3, tracking with digital manifests, the paper trail. The government has massively modernized this whole process. Here's how a compliant waste shipment actually flows. First, your facility generates the waste. Then, an authorized transporter hauls it off-site, and your designated facility safely receives it. Finally, and here's the modern twist, that final record gets submitted directly into a centralized national electronic manifest system. So the paper trail is now an instant digital footprint. Now, here's a number you really need to remember. 90 days. Why? Because exactly 90 days after your hazardous waste hits its final destination, that electronic manifest flips from a standard regulatory record into a completely public document. This perfectly illustrates the modern regulatory mindset: transparency over secrecy. Since 2014, authorities have explicitly forbidden companies from hiding hazardous waste shipments by calling them confidential business information. You can't just claim your chemical waste is a trade secret. Once that 90-day clock runs out, the public absolutely has a right to know what was moved and where it went. Moving on to Section 4, requesting exceptions and variances. This is your fork in the road. Look, manufacturing is complicated, and sometimes materials aren't just garbage. The rules actually have some built-in flexibility. You can contrast standard waste disposal, which requires all that strict tracking we just covered, with what's called a non-waste determination or a variance. Basically, you can bypass strict waste regulations if you successfully petition the government and prove your byproduct is essentially a valuable commercial product, meaning it functions as a continuous manufacturing ingredient, not something you're just throwing away. But, quick warning, the burden of proof is entirely on you. To win that variance, you have to prove the material is an essential part of your production process. You got to show it legitimately substitutes a brand new raw material, that it'll be reclaimed within a reasonable time frame, and crucially, that you handle it carefully to minimize any environmental loss. Basically, you have to prove it makes economic sense and you're keeping it secure, which ties directly into Section 5, the rules of legitimate recycling, the recycling test. Regulators heavily scrutinize recycling claims because, let's be honest, they want to stop bad actors from using the word recycling as a convenient cover story for cheap, illegal dumping. To prove you're actually recycling, you have to pass a strict four-part test. First, the material has to provide a genuinely useful contribution. Second, the end result must be a valuable product people actually want to buy. Third, you have to manage it like a valuable commodity, not trash. And fourth, the final product can't contain unexpected spikes of toxic chemicals. Think of it like baking a cake. You can't hide hazardous waste in the batter and just call it recycled. And here is a massive red flag. You absolutely cannot claim to be recycling a valuable commodity if you're storing it so carelessly that it's leaking into the soil or groundwater. If your supposedly valuable material escapes into the environment and isn't immediately cleaned up, regulators will instantly reclassify it as illegally discarded waste, no matter what your original intentions were. All right, final section. Section 6, the stakes of noncompliance. Why this all actually matters for you and your company. When compliance fails, the operational nightmares really kick in. Ignoring these standards can lead to catastrophic environmental damage. And on a daily basis, getting the paperwork wrong can mean a designated facility outright rejects your shipment. That means a truckload of highly hazardous waste gets turned around and sent right back to your loading dock, multiplying your costs and your liability. Nobody wants that. The bottom line is the law does not mess around here. The regulatory code makes it very clear that submitting false information, faking petitions, or deliberately dodging the tracking process carries incredibly severe penalties. We are talking about massive, business-ending fines, and yes, even the very real potential for criminal imprisonment for the individuals involved. Which leaves us with this final question. Are your facility's waste tracking and recycling practices truly compliant? I challenge you to take these concepts back to work. Take a hard look at your manifests, your designated facilities, and your recycling streams. Audit your own processes. Make sure you're speaking the regulator's language and staying firmly on the right side of the law. Thanks for diving into this overview with me today, and stay compliant out there.
If you found this helpful or want to stay updated when this regulation changes, subscribe and support the channel. And if you need the full technical details on this CFR, click the link in the description below. See you next time.